Varda, I love your artistic approach in the film that you use all the 70s techniques, like, collages and zooming. Can you tell us about that approach?
Yes. Well, my philosophy in making films, which I think is shared by a lot of filmmakers, is that everything in the film, all the elements move towards telling the same story, and that, everything counts. And so I thought it was important to find aesthetics that reflected the 60s and 70s. And so, I researched it, and I think the other thing collage was a very popular art form at that time. Of course, people zoomed before it became prohibitive. At a certain point, it was said never zoom, and that people only use prime lenses, which I think the zooms work really well. Mm-hmm. And I also discovered that in the back of drugstores during that time, families would go back and have portraits done, and they would have blue backdrops.
Pale blue, yes.
And so that's where the idea for the backdrops came. So it's just to create kind of a cohesive and integral aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. You also, the opening is so striking. You set up the time, with the civil rights and the archival footage. Tell us about the importance for you to start the documentary on that route.
Well, I think it's always important to kind of signal to the audience what the film is going to be. And this is why we also see, Janis in her present day time at the beginning of the film as well. Because it kind of clues you into the language of the film. Mm-hmm. And that way you can kind of relax. My whole aspiration really is for the audience to be able to feel completely relaxed and safe and suspend all disbelief and just enter into the realm of the film. If you can do that, that's the ultimate.
Mm-hmm. And Janis, I can only imagine that you, in your career, you had people approach you to tell your story.
Since I was 16.
And you turned them down.
I did.
Why yes to her, and why now?
She was annoyingly persistent. I hit my 60s, and I suddenly realized that I had lived through a lot of interesting times. Not that this isn't the most interesting time I've lived through, but that there were stories that went along with those times, and the songs reflected the stories. And I started thinking about the generations that hadn't lived through those times. And one of the great ways to show someone something that they have not experienced is film. And so it made sense, but it never made sense with any of the people who approached me. Varda's attitude was the same as mine, which was she didn't want it only to be a puff piece about a celebrity. She wanted it also to reflect the times. And I thought, if you can accomplish that and make it something, I love what you just said about the language. Do it like a song, where my goal as a songwriter is to suck you in before you even know you're being sucked in, and then hit you with the lyric as you slowly absorb the song. That's what At 17 does. That's what Jesse does. You're pulled in by the music, and it goes into your heart, and then eventually your brain catches up with it. So we spoke a similar language, and it made sense. It was a good time for me to do it. It was a good time for Varda. And we weren't busy. It was COVID, so.
Watching the film, I'm struck by your resilience, your perseverance throughout your entire life. Where did that come from? It still comes from some.
I put a lot of it down to sheer stubbornness. It's just so annoying to me when someone gets in my way, and I think that I'm doing the right thing with my work. It's like setting fire to Shadow's newspaper. How dare he? I was singing my heart out, and how dare he be reading his newspaper? I think that there are certain things that are very common to all artists. Omnivorous curiosity, a great deal of drive, and the refusal to stop, to give up. If you're an artist, you don't get to give up. You get to keep going. And it's not just because we owe the audience. It's because I think every artist knows on some level that the talent we're born with is something we had nothing to do with. It's our job to corral it and to caress it and to nurture it. But realistically, we're born with it. And I was born with a tremendous surfeit of talent in my area. And it's like a monkey on your back. You spend your whole life trying to live up to your talent and hoping that one day you look up at an album or a book or whatever and say, I finally hit it. I did the absolute best my talent demanded. And even then, you don't get to rest.
Vara, I find myself so immersed in your storytelling, and there's this lyrical recreations of what was happening to Janis. Can you tell us about those vignettes?
Yes. Well, initially, as Janis mentioned, when I first contacted her, it was during the pandemic. And I had read her autobiography after, pretty well after, actually, I first came up with the thought that I wanted to make this film about her, and was very struck by her relationship with Pat. And I found it so beautiful and touching. So I had this idea of I would go to her house, and I would follow her and Pat around. And
during the pandemic.
And they would have tea together and chat and whatever it was. And then I'd cut into the past. And then I mentioned this to Janis, and she said,
there is absolutely no way that is happening. Yeah, I mean, I draw a very clear line between what is my work and what is my home life. And my wife, who I've been with for 36 years now, she didn't sign up for this. This is not her world. And so if I had asked her, she would have said yes. But I wouldn't have asked her, because she deserves to have her own life. It's a very difficult thing when you're a public person. There are very difficult lines, as you know. And it was really important to me. Plus, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I really didn't want to run any kind of risk for either of us. Varda offered to wear a hazmat suit.
Yes, and my whole crew was going to wear a hazmat suit. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? Because now, to me, film is a visual language. That's what draws me to it. And I really wanted to have a strong visual unfolding. So I thought, well, what if we incorporate like my imaginings of Janis's memories as though they're happening in the present? As though we like time traveled back in time, and then the DP shoots them like it's a documentary. And so that's how the idea first came about. And then I used actual photo. Janis has an incredible collection. She's been photographed a lot through the years, particularly by Peter Cunningham, Douglas Gilbert, who photographed her for Life magazine, etc. So I looked at each of the photographs, even her childhood photographs, and then did my best to match the wardrobe and the style and the aesthetic. And we found, locations, and we're very, as rigorous as possible to have it feel authentic, but then also not to try. And I didn't want to delude myself that I could recreate it because I wasn't there. And I don't think you can recreate, but you can certainly imagine something close to, what you imagine it to be. And that's so I kind of surrendered myself to that.
Mm-hmm. Where you just expressed, Janis, that you were very particular about the approach. What other things were off limits vis-a-vis your life?
Nothing, I don't think.
No. Were there people that you didn't want?
No, in fact, I had two requests. I asked Varda to not make me look like a celebrity, that it be real life, and it reflect the times. And I asked her to talk to people who didn't like me, most of whom were dead, so that was solved.
That would have required a clairvoyant.
No, I was hands off. I basically turned over my archival material. That's really loud, by the way. I turned over my archival material to her, and we did 3 interviews, 2 with Varda and 1 with James Reed, who you saw in this. And she had the book, and then that was it. The first time I saw it was the rough cut in Ireland when the Irish Film Institute showed it.
I mean, I have to say, to me, that speaks to your respect for the artist and the artist independent. And, I think that's where that came from.
Well, there's not much point in having a director and saying yes if you're then going to interfere. I mean, what's the point? I'm 74. I was 70 or 71 when we started this. I've led a very open life. It's not like I had a great deal of secrets that I needed to protect. And yeah, you're right. It is a question of, if you're working with another artist, then you respect them and you give them the respect that you would want for yourself. Varda clearly was an accomplished filmmaker. She got it, so let her do it.
Tell us about it. There is such rich archival material here. Not just her life, but also, you know, the times and amazing research that you've done. Tell us, how long did it take, and was that arduous to get all that archival material put together?
No, I mean, it's like a treasure hunt. It's actually a lot of fun, and you learn so much about life and history. And I had assistants. Our daughter, Paloma Bennett, helped. She was one of the archival producers, and we had a second archival producer kind of in the latter part help acquire some of it, and I found a bunch of it, and our editor. But I think, to me, some of the archival materials I'm particularly happy about are the ones that show the complexity of the times. For example, the Muhammad Ali clip, and that, you know, it's not what you think. So it was really important to me to try and find kind of a fresh take on it and not go with what we expect.
I think it also speaks to your ability to turn on a dime, because Varda originally thought, oh, she must have all this Super 8. But we lived on a farm. We weren't even middle class yet, much less lower middle class. And so nobody could afford a Super 8. We have no footage from when I was a child. It was amazing that they had the pictures that they had, because it was so expensive then to develop a picture that it was only for special occasions. Or my grandparents, you know, when I visited them. So she was forced into that, and then came up with the concept of, well, let me research the clothing, let me research how everyone looked, let me find people who can recreate that. And then instead of doing the kind of fake looking, and this is really Janis, although it's not, she went ahead and made it in memory. So it's very much an actor's motion as well. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to tread on you.
No, thank you. We also incorporate the photographs into it, so we really mesh it all together, like, as you mentioned, a collage. And I think that's part of what helps the audience kind of enter into it and kind of let go, is that it is really rooted in the actual, you know, real-life photographs and real-life imagery, and it just kind of, you know, pulls off of it.
You know, and tell us also about the choice that you made, that at first we don't hear from Janis speaking herself, and her voice appears in the latter half, loud and clear. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Actually, Janis pretty much narrates the film from the very start, so we do hear her voice throughout the film, interestingly enough. We don't see her.
Correct, that's what I meant.
But we do see her in the very beginning. And that was, again, my intention. I felt that if we did that, it would really allow the audience to travel back in time, and you wouldn't have to go back and forth, like to the present, to the past, to the present, to the past. I really wanted to play off of the, you know, biopic genre, basically, and create a linear story. And we had recently one of the critics gave us a headline, and it said a conventional film about an unconventional artist. And I said, that's right. I think it would be like a double negative if we made an unconventional film about an unconventional artist. I think creating this kind of, again, more predictable narrative really allows Janis to shine bright in her, yeah.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's linear, but I mean, we've talked about your artistic approach to the film. It's not that, I mean, I actually don't find it as conventional.
I agree. But I think I guess, as Janis told me, they always have to find something wrong, right?
You know, every critic needs to put something in there. It's like an Islamic prayer rug. It has to have something to prove that it's not perfect, because only God is perfect. So every critic apparently thinks they're God. And the rest of the piece was absolutely wonderful. If I may, my favorite review of my shows Sold out London show, 2,000 people, and killer band, fantastic press, great audience, and the opening was, and I was 45 pounds less than I am now. The opening was Janis, a short, pudgy woman in a red pantsuit. And I thought, that's it for me and critics. I'm done.
Yeah. But no, I agree. I mean, the detail, when I first told the editor what I wanted to do, Ryan Larkin, I think, did a magnificent job. And I had a great team. You know, Matthew Wilder, the cinematography, I think, is beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, producers who help it make it all happen, Alessandra Pasquino, Pierre Hauser. But I think that when I first told Ryan, like how I wanted to mix all these different elements and create a cohesive whole, he said, I think that's absolutely crazy. Mm-hmm. Like no one would try to do that. Mm-hmm. But I'm in.
And if you look at the songs she picks a song like Stars that's 7 minutes, that has no chorus, that has no proper refrain, that never really repeats itself, that breaks every rule in the book, and yet is my most covered song. So I think we were just tangential.
And you also add animation as well,
Yeah.
and you illustrate the lyrics, which is so beautiful to be able to actually read the lyrics as well.
I found a wonderful animator, actually, who lives in Hawaii. I went to the Dance Film Festival, and I saw one of the dance films had like just a few little line drawings, and I thought that was perfect because, by the way, that handwriting is Janis's actual handwriting that we copied. We had Janis write some of it out.
I know, she calls me and she says, I need you to write these things out, and I'm like, why? And she said, don't worry about it, and I'm, okay, whatever.
But I thought that the line drawing animations left space for the audience to have their kind of imagining of the song and experience of the song, to keep it kind of simple and minimalistic, so the song could also really be on the fore, you know.
One of the most poignant moments in the sequence in the documentary is the concert, the Society's Child, and the backstage, etc. You know, tell us about putting together that sequence. And I was just wondering, Janis, it's so heartbreaking from an audience to be watching that on screen. What it must have been like for you to watch it all over again, being recreated.
That's a good question.
It's a scary question. I'm still learning to deal with my life being up there. I am used to seeing my album covers, I'm used to seeing interviews, but I am not used to seeing myself on a big screen. It's very enlightening and confusing and strange. So it took me decades to get over Society's Child, decades and a very good therapist. And I still, when I'm very short, as you saw, I'm under 5 feet. When I'm rushed by a crowd of people who are normally a foot taller than me, I get really, really freaked out because it's too much like that. And there's a point where you just don't get over that. I mean, people tripping you as you walk on stage, people spitting in your food, people screaming at you in the street out of nowhere. That was a really hard time, and it was compounded by what didn't make it into the film, which is my parents were going through a very ugly divorce. So there was that as well. And yet, watching it through the lens of Varda's work and the times, watching it become a fulcrum, I was very proud. You know, because the song did so much more than I could ever have imagined it would do. To this day, people say, yeah, I overheard my mom at her coffee clatch with her friends in the morning before I went to school saying, well, you know, what would you do if your daughter dated one? And I never thought of it. It's like the South Africa thing. I get people saying, that was the first integrated show I was ever at. These are major things to have done, and I just did them because they felt right. It wasn't any great plan, but they did a much bigger job. They did the job that art is supposed to do. Yeah. Sorry, that should have been the whole answer.
Beautiful. And on a personal level, I will never forget being in New York City, seeing one of your concerts in the 90s, and you sang Marriage in London, and you educated the audience at a time that the audience needed to be educated. And it was such a, I mean, you made me feel so seen. And you have done that throughout your career. So thank you.
So I loved Married in London because when I lecture or when I give classes, I always say, do not use a curse word unless there is no alternative, because otherwise it loses power. But I was so annoyed at what was happening in this country, and I was in England, and people were getting married, people like me. And I came home and I couldn't get married, and it was so wrong. And my wife said, you better stop being angry and start being funny, because this is not interesting. So Married in London came out, and it was fascinating to watch because I get a fairly liberal audience. But there were walkouts when I put it in the front of the show. People would get up and leave. Wow. And I ended up putting it in the second half of the show. So by then they knew me. By then they were comfortable with me. By then they knew that I wasn't going to bang them over the head, and they could just relax and have fun. And I think that's, again, part of the artist's job, is to go out there and find ways to change hearts. Yeah. Because you change hearts before you can change minds. And if you can sneak it in with a song like that, where people suddenly think, they go home maybe and they think, that was pretty funny. Yeah, and then again, and maybe I know one. Then it changes their hearts. And then the law changes, we hope.
Thank you. Going back to the Society's Child sequence, the concert, the editing, you did a fantastic job in that sequence. Can you tell us about editing that sequence?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing about, from my perspective, putting that sequence together is to evoke the feeling, the emotions that Janis was going through, and the tension. And it's almost like a horror film in a way, with the kind of chanting and the slow motion. And we took layers of film, basically people going like this and like double impose them and added color and like, you would in a horror, because it's horrifying, which Janis experienced. And, slow motion and just techniques that would just evoke the feeling. My most important intention there was to evoke that feeling of, this horror of what's happening, And then that moment of stillness where she decides to go back and just, you get quiet and you hear her footsteps and you hear, the sound of her picking up the guitar, and start to sing again. So it's the kind of the cacophony, and then once the decision was made to go back, it's that quiet moment where, you don't know what's going to happen after it, but in that moment, she's at peace because she's made the decision.
And then life begins again, and it goes bang.
Does that answer your question?
No, absolutely. Thank you. Janis, in the documentary, towards the end, it's mentioned, that you stopped the concert, the touring, and that you were not able, somebody says that you're not able to get resolution to what you were undergoing. Have you been able to find resolution now?
I don't think there's any way to find resolution when you lose something that's that integral a part of your life. It's a death. And vocal scarring with an unknown virus out of nowhere in the middle of a tour, and then 3.5 months of trying to get it diagnosed because I kept saying to people, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. And yet they would say, but you look fine and you sound fine. Well, of course I sound fine. That's my job. And finally then, through Joan Baez and her team, finding an otolaryngologist who did diagnose it. And then a horror story to me was being diagnosed on a Friday, going home with my wife, Monday morning seeing a speech pathologist, with my bags packed to be shipped on Wednesday for the tour starting Friday. And on Monday, the pathologist being honest and saying, no, you will never sound like yourself, no matter what we do and how we retrain you, because you have a scar, so you're going to have to push past the scar, which means all your phrasing will be different. And then I went to bed, I slept for 24 hours. I woke up, I called everybody to cancel. I told my crew, I told my agent, and then I spent just a couple of months in limbo. And I'm not ashamed to admit that it's been 2 years, and We're going to see Jean Smart on Broadway in July, and that will be my first time inside a theater watching another performer since then, because it's just too hard. But, you know, there's things in life that people go through that they don't recover from, and it's not necessary to recover in order to go on. And I think that's one of the big lessons in my life, watching other people. It's just that artists live so much louder than everybody else. But everybody's got stuff they go through. And some of it you'd never get to recover from, but you go on. That's your job. You're human, you go on.
You have been so inspiring and continue to inspire us, Janis. Thank you so much.
More than welcome.
Thank you, both of you, for being here. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all
Thanks,
for coming.
everyone,
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everybody.